Okay, yeah, cool. Let me... All right, and we're just waiting for everybody to trickle in here. We'll probably start at the 5 after mark. Thanks for jumping in, everybody. We're gonna do some learning. We're gonna acquire knowledge, which I think is the goal this weekend. Hackathons are an excellent learning resource. Hey, what's going on, Daniel? We are starting soon. Gonna let people trickle in now that we've got the ping going. How's your afternoon going? How's everybody doing? All right, we are a little bit after the 5-minute mark. So we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you guys for joining us today. We're gonna do some live coding, some live learning. We're here for the Fall In Hackathon starting tomorrow at 12 p.m. Pacific time. You can register at fallin.today if you haven't already. It's a great group of guys and gals. Highly recommend checking that out. Hey, Mohammed. So let's go ahead and get into it. So today we're going to be using 4 technologies that I have used in the past for hackathons. They are excellent tools for moving quickly and remaining agile as your requirements change throughout the weekend. You do more brainstorming and you figure out more of what you want to build. For the most part, these tools will enable you to make those changes quickly. We've got Sveltekit, which is going to be the UI layer. So it's going to be kind of equivalent to React or Vue, or if you're feeling like particularly esoteric, like jQuery. And we'll get into a little bit of why it's an excellent framework, but it comes out of the build pipeline very small, and as we'll see, very fun to work with. You just want to watch out because it's kind of new. So, there's not a huge community around it, and it isn't released yet. It's in like a public beta, I think they're at now. 1.0 is coming out real soon, but there are some breaking changes coming with that. But for this weekend, it's not going to make that big of a difference. Tailwind is what we're going to be using for styles. If you've used Bootstrap or Bulma, it's going to be similar to those. It does take a different approach that we'll see, where all of the classes that it provides are very small. They call them utility classes. This lets you design and build really quickly in a flexible way while still like mostly coming out good looking no matter what you do. Now, that flexibility can also cause issues, so you do need to be careful. And one of the biggest complaints is how big your HTML gets, and we'll kind of go over how you can avoid doing that to make sure that your code remains readable for your team as you're collaborating. For our database and authentication, we're going to use Supabase. It's an open source alternative to Firebase, which is made by Google. They've got a really good free tier. The APIs that they provide are really easy to use, like signing in is what we're going to work on today. And it's like one line of code. Now, with any platform like this, you do want to watch out for vendor lock-in. But because Supabase is open source, it's going to be much easier to avoid. In theory, you could go and host your own copy of Supabase if you wanted to. And it's also got a ton of features. So we're going to stay pretty focused today on authentication. We might touch on databases if we have time towards the end. But it also has like file buckets. I think they have serverless functions now, which we don't necessarily need because we're going to be using Vercel for that. There's Vercel, and then there's another very similar service. There's like Heroku, I think, is similar. There's one like direct competitor that I'm forgetting the name of, but Vercel is free. The maker of Svelte, Rich Harris, is now employed with Vercel. So the integrations there are only getting better, and it's super easy to set up. So now we can kind of jump into getting our project set up. The first thing that we're going to do is set up Supabase. So if you've gone through the preconditions, this should be pretty easy. If you have any questions, drop them into chat. I'm going to wait for about 1 or 2 minutes on each slide before we move on. So here we're just using this Svelte like add utility that's available. And this is going to put everything that we need for Supabase into our project. Okay, so I'll go ahead and run this in my project as well to make sure that we're caught up when we get down to the end. So I'm going to steal this. And we can see this is what it should look like if you've run that successfully. And then after that, we just need to install the dependencies that are created there. Should just be up to date. And now we're ready to move on to the next step. So all of Supabase is going to be put in the environment file that's been created. So you'll find that in your project directory. Come on, VS Code. Let's try this again. Okay, VS Code is unhappy with me right now. Is this Zen mode being mean? Interesting. All right, give me one moment. I'm going to go ahead and get VS Code restarted. There we go. There we go. All right. Now we have our .env file. And let's try this one more time. There we go. So we should see these environment variables once we've been set up. And we're going to remove the private key and the JWT secret. These are going to be used if you're on the server. And everything that we're going to work on today is going to be from the client. Because we're doing user sign-in as well, I would recommend just leaving those out, unless you absolutely need to do something server-side. The reason for that is when you look at like authorization for user permissions and things like that, everything on the server is going to bypass that. And so you kind of have to be careful with what you're exposing. It's much easier to have a security flaw in your app if you're doing things on the server. And with all of these APIs, pretty much everything will be feasible from the client. So next, let me escape the presentation. And we can go to Supabase. We sign in. Thank you, Supabase. Very nice. Here we go. So if we sign into Supabase, we can pick our project. Come down here to Settings. And we're going to go to API. And we have our project URL here. This is what we're going to put in the space for the Supabase URL. And then we're going to use the anon-public or non-public project API key. It's important that you get those right because we want to, again, make sure we're not exposing some of these secrets. And if you're wondering, the prefix here for Vite is special for our build tool. And that's going to make sure that this is accessible from the browser. If we were to remove this prefix like we had with these secrets here, these are not going to be accessible on the browser. So if you ever need to set some new environment variables, make sure you prefix it with this. Go ahead and get our URL copied over and our public token copied over. And that's our env file. And we'll take a second. Is anybody not caught up that's trying to follow along? Awesome, let's keep going. So now we're going to make a couple of tweaks to the Supabase file. The reason that I like to do this is just to keep it consistent with the rest of the project. If we look, we have this new source lib db.js file. And first of all, we're working in TypeScript. So we want this to be a TypeScript file. And I like to write things without using default exports because it makes refactoring easier. So we're just going to change it to support that. It looks like I forgot to install my dependencies. Getting our squiggly lines of death. While that's loading, go ahead and rename the database JS to database TS. And we're going to get rid of this export default. And we're just going to prefix this with export. So those of you who are new to JavaScript, the difference between these two, we can actually put in both. The difference between these two is if you're exporting default, when we go to import this, I would not wrap this in anything. So I just kind of have this variable, but I can call this whatever I want. So this could be like my database import. And like that's fine. It's still going to refer to the Supabase variable in db.ts. And while this is great, this can make it really hard to figure out what you're looking at. So that's kind of why I like to go this route where we don't use export default. And so now this is going to break, and we have to put Supabase inner curly brackets to have a good import. Once we've made those changes, we're going to go back to Supabase, and we're going to add our first table that we're going to use for testing. If we have time at the end, we'll start interacting with this table, but for now, it's just kind of here for a sanity check. And the way that we're going to set that up is we're going to go back to Supabase, and we're going to go to, let me make this bigger. We're going to go to database. No, we're going to go to SQL editor. And it should start you out here on the welcome tab. And so we have a bunch of scripts that they have ready for us to go. And we've got these quick starts. And the one that I like to start with is the user management starter. The reason for that is you pretty much need this for every app. And so if you start kind of getting comfortable with things by building user management, no matter what you end up finishing the weekend with, this is still going to be relevant. It's still going to be helpful. You can just click on that. And it's going to open up the script that's needed. And you're welcome to configure this or change this however you want to. The database under the hood is just Postgres, which is a really popular open source database. And once you're happy with it, we're just going to hit run. And I think I already ran this in my database. So we'll go ahead and get rid of the storage chunk because I did not clean that up. Okay, looks like we got all the way through. That shouldn't give you an error if you're running it for the first time. And we'll go to the table editor next, and we'll load for a second, and we should see a profiles table hiding here. There's not a whole lot here, but we have an ID, updated app, a username, and an avatar URL, which is going to be enough to start with. Once we've done that, we're going to copy paste some code, as we all like to do from time to time. And what this code is going to do is we are starting by importing that client the same way we did before. We're using an await block, which is a Svelte feature to add some syntactic sugar around using promises. So it's going to say loading while it's loading. And then once we have a result, it's going to display r.status. We also can put a catch here. Thank you, caps lock. And so this would be like error encountered. And then we can do like e.message because this is a JavaScript error. So this is kind of handy if you are going to fetch data from a table or something else and you don't want to mess around with writing promises in JavaScript and keeping your state in sync. There's definitely a use case for doing it this way and a use case for doing it up in your script tag, which we'll get to a little bit later. So now that we've done that, we can open up, or actually, I'm lying. Now that we've done that, we can come into a terminal, we can do npm run dev, and that's going to start our project. And this URL right here is how you're going to open your project in your web browser. So you can replace 127.0.0.1 with localhost. But yeah, it's going to be localhost 5173. And when we open that in our browser, you can see we've got loading and then 200. And let's say that we had an error in here. We could just put some nonsense. Actually, we can do wait promise.reject. So this is a promise that's just going to fail. And we can see now error has been encountered. So let's do new error. This is my error. So this is a really easy way to start interacting with data that's stored in your database without needing to dive too deep. And when we're doing that select, we're going to do from table, select fields. In the README for the workshop repository, there are a lot of resources that you can use, and the Supabase documentation should be in there, and it really covers a lot of this in depth. Awesome. So next, we need to update our Vercel build. This is an important one because otherwise we're not going to build and deploy properly. So we're going to come over to vercel.com. I'm going to sign in with GitHub. You can sign in with whichever method you prefer. I'm going to pick my app out here also. Dark mode, please. We can come into deployments up here, or no, settings, sorry. And general settings, build and development settings. I am lying again. Environment variables. Oh, there we go. This is easier when it's not mobile. So we're going to come in here and we'll add that same URL, anonymous key from our env file, into the Vite, or not the Vite, the Vercel build pipeline. So this will provide them when our app is deployed to keep it in sync with what we have locally. All right, I'm going to take another pause here. If anybody's following along and is not where we're at, go ahead and drop a message in chat. Awesome. Let's keep rolling. So we're going to use another similar tool here to install Tailwind. And this is going to handle all of our styles. So I'm going to stop my app and I'm going to run the script. We're going to get another similar message that says successfully set up. You should see that twice. And we're going to run npm install again. Okay. And once that's run, I'm going to go ahead and start my app back up. We should get this warning. It says no utility classes are detected. That's Tailwind complaining that it exists and we're not using it. So let's go ahead and test it out. I'm again going to copy and paste some of this code. And when we open up our app now, we should see a blue rectangle. So to walk through what this is doing a little bit, we're setting the width of this div to 64 units. In this case, that's 16 rem, which is the root font size for the page. The height is the same. And then we're setting the background to be blue 200. Tailwind comes with a pretty extensive built-in palette. So we have a couple of different grays. We have slate, gray, zinc, neutral, stone, and then you have all your regular colors, red, orange, amber, yellow, etc. This is a really good launching point if you don't want to go and try to figure out a palette for your app or like pick bespoke brand colors. This is usually enough to where you don't need to think about it too much beyond, I want a blue and orange app if you're a Broncos fan. So a little bit of just information on what we're going to do. When you're building an app, there are two like paradigms that developers and designers take. You have mobile first and desktop first. Mobile first is when you build for a mobile screen first, and desktop is when you build for a desktop screen. For the sake of simplicity, we're going to be doing desktop first, but converting everything over to being mobile friendly is pretty easy with Tailwind. It has a really good setup for doing that, and if we have time, we can look at that a little bit as well. There's also a Figma for the pages that we're going to build. I believe that's in the repository as well. But the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add the background to our page. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of this. And this is what we're shooting for. So we're going to make a main element. This is going to be the main container on our page. And similarly to before, we're going to do a width. But this time it's going to be the screen. And we're going to do height screen as well. And then for our background for now, we're going to use orange 200, but we'll come back and replace that with a gradient later. Okay. So now let's add a card with some content. And we have these goals and hints if you're following along. But either you guys are speedy or we're just watching, which is okay. So we'll go ahead and we're going to add our box here. So I'm going to add a section. This is a section of our page. And we're going to cheat because we don't have a width class for what we want. So we're going to break the convention here. We're going to use 768 pixels. And then just real quick before we get too far into it, I'll add some height and a background. So you can see I have this little tiny thing. Let's make that taller. We've got this box here that's now a very specific width that doesn't exist in Tailwind yet. It's not in our design language, but we can break out when we really feel like we need to. So let's go ahead and fix our background color. We shouldn't need a height just yet, but we can leave that in there. Let's round our corners. You don't have to do this if you're following along. It again kind of depends on the look that you're going for. Rounded corners are going to be a little bit friendlier, where sharp corners are going to be more professional. So now we're here and we have one last chunk. We want a shadow to give it some depth. You can do drop shadow. And I like big shadows. I like them to be obvious. The small shadows are subtle and add a lot of pop. But for something this like central on the screen, I like to have a nice big one. And I think I have my height wrong. Give me 1 second. Yes, we need to go bigger. All right. So now we're up to this step. And we need to center this. Oh, it's zinc. Thank you, Zach. It's lying to me. Much gooder. All right. So for those of you who have been developing for a little while, you know that centering things is always super fun. We're going to cheat and use Flexbox. So in Tailwind, when you change the display of an element, we can just do flex, but we could also do grid, or we could do block, or inline, any of the things. But we're going to use flex, and we're going to justify all of our elements along the main axis to the center, and we're going to use items center. So that on the secondary axis will also be centered. So now you can see our content card is smack in the middle of our page, right where we want it. And that lines up. So we have a stock photo ready to go. And of course, a link would be great, but I have it right here. Now, this is one you can use whichever image you would like to. We need to have 2 elements here. And we're going to drop our photo in. Come on. There we go. And we'll just say alt my app stock photo. Okay, we have our image. It's a little bit bigger than I think we want it. So let's go ahead and make that smaller. And you'll notice that we wrap this in a div. We kind of want to cheat, again, because if we didn't put this div here, and we just put a width of like 48, we can look that now it's small, or it's not as wide, it's smaller, but it's also too short. So we might go height full, and it's subtle, but now it's being stretched. So what we really want to do is we just want it to fill the space as best as we can get it to. So for that, we have to add another div. We're going to remove our width on the image. We're going to flex our section. So now it fits nice and neat in here. And let's go ahead and put our width on the containing element. And let's do a border, little border to check our work here. And that's lining up pretty nice. But if you have a different image, or if you you just have an image that isn't the right aspect ratio here, which is pretty likely. What we want to do here is flex this as well, and we want to overflow clip. And what this will do is any of that image that sprawls beyond what we expect it to is going to just not show up. This is also wrong. Dimensions are difficult. There we go. Now we have our image positioned, but I want those rounded corners, and we don't have that. So we can do the same thing that we did before. We can put rounded to XL, and what we're going to run into, what we should run into, interesting. All right, well, we can do this on the image real quick just for demonstration. But if we just use rounded, it's going to round every corner, which is not what we want here. So what we can do is we can add a modifier to our rounded, and we have a rounded left class. So we can do rounded left to XL. Now we can see this corner up here is not being rounded. The rest of this image is hiding beneath here. So go ahead and pull that off, drop this onto our div. And we are very close. It's too big. Now, again, for those of you following along, if you want to cheat like I am, you can come over here to the outline file in the repository. This is going to have all the steps that we're following along with. So we're going to cheat and look at the code. And there we go. Our image is placed. We still have plenty more image beneath this. And we have our rounded corners. So we're lined up. This is going to be the largest step, where we need to add a sign-in button. And we need to add our header text. So what we can do is we'll add another div. And we want this div to fill the rest of the space. So we can use flex1, which is going to make it fill as much of the available space. It's going to fill 1 unit. So we put a background on this. Zing. Here we go. You can see that's filling up everything here. And if we wanted to have 2 elements that were evenly sized, we could put another one. And I'll make this one a different color. We can see that they're kind of sharing that space. In our case, we just need the one. We don't need a background on it. And we're going to use h1 because this is our header, our main header. We're going to add login. It's hiding up here. It's dark. And we'll leave it that way for now. We also want to add a button. Login with Google, because that's the only one we're going to support. So now we have our text and our button. They are technically here. They are not the best looking though. So let's go ahead and get them centered. And we want a column because we're going to center them vertically and we're going to left align them. So now we have our header is here and our button is here. Our button is just taking up all of this space. Let's go ahead and make our header also a little bit less ugly. We can do text orange 200. And those are the 2 big color classes to keep in mind is you have background and text. That's going to cover like 90% of the coloring that you'll do. So we have it, we can see it, we can read it, it's tiny. To make it bigger, we can do text, and then we have small, large, 2XL, or we have large, extra large, and then we have up to 9XL. 9XL is very large. It's a little bit more than we need. So we're going to go with 4XL. That's big enough to be legible and draw the eye, but it's not so big that it's in the way. But I do want it to be bolder, so we're going to do font bolder. There we go. Now, it's kind of writing this image. We do want to add some dead space. So we can come up here, and we have M for margin. We have P for padding. So here we want to add some padding. I like to do things in multiples of 8. So we can look at what 16 looks like. That's a little bit too much. So we can do 8, and that gives us a nice break here between the image and our header. Now let's style our button. And we'll do a background of zinc 500. We want to stay on the same grayscale so that things continue to work together. We'll do a text orange 200. And we can do a padding of 4. That's a little big. So maybe we'll do a horizontal padding of 4 and a vertical padding of 2. And that's a little bit tighter. But again, we kind of have our login G is touching our button. So with Flexbox, if we want to add some space between items, we can use a gap. This is a really useful tool. I use this all the time. Basically, we can say, I want everything to be evenly spaced, and you don't need to worry about margins between your child elements. And it gives you a consistent grid style look. So if you look now, we have that nice break between the button and the login. And that's pretty much what we need. I don't like this orange text, so I'm going to change this. We're going to do text zinc 50. And it's almost white, but it's not white. It's hard to see, but it does make a difference. And we're going to darken this a little bit. Now that's starting to look a little better. Let's make the text bigger as well. We'll do XL. I think that's a good size. And then we'll do rounded 2XL to match our content card. Now, when I hover over my button, we don't have any indication that I'm actually hovering over it, except for the cursor, which is not ideal. Users do like to see that visual feedback. And with Tailwind, that's super easy. Let's go ahead and make the button rise up a little bit when we hover it. So we have that box shadow from before, or the drop shadow from before. Let's use a large and see what that looks like. So you can see at the bottom we have a little bit of a shadow, but we only want it to show up while it's hovered. So all we need to do in Tailwind is add hover. And now this is going to not have a shadow until I hover it. It's real subtle, but it is there. But bring this back real quick, we can also see there's no transition. It's either there or it's not. And that's also something that's going to be really easy to go ahead and patch up with Tailwind. We can just do transition shadow. And now it's probably going to show up similar on the stream, but there is a fade in there, so it looks like the button is popping up. And we can also darken the background just a little bit, because we still have we've got 700 that falls between the actual background and where our button's at. We can darken that. If we use the right class. There we go. All right. I think this is looking pretty good. I think we've deviated from the Figma that's going to be available a little bit, but that's okay. If anybody's following along, if you have questions or you need some time to catch up, go ahead and drop that in the chat. We'll wait for about a minute. And then we will start to wire this up so you can actually sign into your app. All right, let's go ahead and get things wired up. This is where we can start interacting with Supabase a little bit. So far, we've only written Markdown in our Svelte file. So this is actually valid HTML, which is one of the things that makes Svelte really approachable if you're new. Because right now, like, I can change this to a .html file and I can pop it open. But we want our file to do things. That's important. And so we can just put a script tag up here. And now this is where the component's state is going to live. So let's say, like, for some reason, I want this to be dynamic. One of the real benefits of Svelte is it makes state management feel really natural. So we can do let my sign-in provider equal Google. And now I can come in here and I can use that variable by wrapping it in curly braces. If you've written React, this is going to feel really familiar. And that's fine. It looks the same. And I can change this to Figma. And now this is different. And that's fine, but it's not interactive yet. So let's make a list of providers. And we can have my sign-in provider. And then what we can do is on click. So this is how we're going to use events in Svelte. It's going to be on : event name. And we can just put a function in here. And we can just say my sign-in provider is going to be equal to providers. And we're just going to do some random picking here. Math.random. No. Random times providers.length. And we'll just math.floor that. Go away. Thank you. So now if we click this, it's going to randomly change. And like, that's fine. But how do we do like not random stuff? So we'll go ahead and get rid of this. And we don't need our array anymore. Let's go ahead and put an input on the page. And I'll just throw in some styles here to make it a little bit prettier. We want to match our button with the spacing and the rounding. And we'll do background zinc 600. And we're going to do active. Or no, we want focus background zinc 700 and focus border. Let's do zinc. Or no, let's do orange 700. And we want focus border so that it has some width. And no outlines. Zing, strikes again. There we go. So now when we click in here, it's going to be a little bit darker and orange to match the orange palette we've got going. And now I can start typing. Adrian, get out of here. React is slow. So 2020. The future is now. And let's go ahead and change our text here. So we'll do zinc 50 to match our button, and there we go. We have an input. Now, if we want to start using our input, which is kind of an important part, we can declare let my input value equal empty string. And we can just use bind some attribute, which for an input will be value, is equal to my input value. And then we'll just go ahead and cheat, and we'll just add my input value to the page right there. Now, as I type, you can see text updates. And that's how we can kind of use state management in Svelte and keep it feeling really natural. The only thing that we've done that isn't seen in other frameworks or other languages is this binding. Which I think actually might be in Vue or Angular, but I haven't played with them a whole lot. Let's go ahead and clean that up because we don't need it. And we'll go back to signing in. Now, we need to get our Supabase that we're going to use for signing in. And you'll notice that we have this $lib showing up, and this is some more syntactic sugar that Sveltekit gives us. That's referring to this source lib folder. We have the routes as well, which we don't necessarily want to import directly. And so lib is just kind of a safe way to do that. I like to have things like components under here and API for my API abstractions. And then we can just import from there like lib/API. In this case, it's DB for Supabase. And we'll declare a function, we're using login. That's a pitfall that's really easy to fall into. Either use login, logout, or sign in, sign out. If you use both in your app, it is really easy to get confused. And we can just do supabase.auth.signin. And we're going to tell it that we want to sign in with Google. And next we can do on click login. We'll just pass a function here. And that should be all that we need. We should be able to click here. It's going to take us to our Google sign-in. Adriana, yes, I will talk about that in just a second. This is actually one thing that I've noticed Svelte and Tailwind do together really well. Having tried to use Tailwind with other frameworks, it's a little bit more work to get it out of the markdown. And oh, this is my live copy of the app, but we've signed in. So to look at getting this out, we can detour real quick for that. So there's 3 parts to every Svelte component. We have a script tag, which has our logic. We have all of our markdown or HTML. And then we have our style tag. And something that's kind of cool about Svelte is during the build pipeline, you can actually assign pre-processors to each of these steps. So in theory, like I've never met one, but if you're a Pug fan, you could write Pug here, which is like a HTML format that gets built. Up here, if we wanted to do TypeScript, we can say lang is TypeScript. Down here, we're going to do lang is post CSS, and post CSS is like a build your own like CSS pipeline. So you have like CSS or SCSS, Sass, and less that kind of come out of the box with all their utilities and maybe some plugins, but post CSS is pretty much bring your own show. And Tailwind is built on post CSS, so that's why we're using that here. And in Svelte, all of our styles are going to be automatically scoped, so I'm not going to worry about being more specific with main. If I made another component and I put another main there, we wouldn't conflict here. Now, Tailwind has this add apply function that's used for building like component classes. And because Svelte does the classes for us, we don't have to worry about that as much. But we can just take everything from the class section here, and we can just pop it down here. And let me actually go back to my app. And we can see that nothing has changed. So we can pull this out all the way. We can do section. And here, because we do have multiple divs, I am going to give this one a class. And this is our content. And still no changes. This is really helpful when you get to things like buttons, because we can do button apply. And then if we have more buttons, then they're all going to be the same. We don't need to copy those classes over. Now, I think that in the Tailwind docs, like this is how I write my Svelte and Tailwind. But I think in the docs, they actually recommend against using add apply. I don't remember why off the top of my head, but I think it's like performance related, or it like goes against the core principles of Tailwind, which if you're like huge on doctrine, go for it. But I find this is a really nice way to organize my files and keep everything together. And then just to kind of look at the style scoping real quick while we're here, we'll make a component different button.svelte. And we'll have a button that just says, I'm different. Same deal. And we'll steal these styles. And we'll just make them awful. We're going to just, pink is the new zinc. So we'll come up here and we'll import it. Something to note with Svelte components is they're all default exports by default. If you wrap them in barrel files, which is like your index.ts file, you can change that so that you can import multiple components on one line, which I'm a big fan of doing. And you also need to add .svelte to the end of your import because like JavaScript, TypeScript won't automatically use that file extension. But if we go ahead and throw a different button in here, we have a pink button that behaves the same way, except it's pink now. And that's going to apply to like everything in the styles. So we will come back to that though. I'm going to leave that there. We're at about an hour. So if you guys have any questions, if you want to drop them into chat, I'm going to go grab a water and I'll be back in about 2 or 3 minutes.
And while Brian's grabbing some water, like he said, anybody with any questions, feel free to drop them in chat, and I can answer and have a discussion with y'all if there's any questions. Okay, while Brian is on a short break, in the Fallen Slack channel, there were some questions posted earlier today, or a forum where you could write questions. And some of our Fallen members have written questions to me and Brian. So I'm going to pick a couple and start going through them. So first question is, Zach, I see you worked previously at USAA. What was that like? So yes, whoever has stalked my LinkedIn, I'm assuming, yeah, I did work at USAA about a year ago at this point. Um, and so it was my first job right out of college. They offered me a job when I graduated as a full stack developer, but focusing in front end. And so the tech stack that I used there was React and JavaScript. And then with the backend stuff, a little bit of Java, specifically Spring Boot. So it was a great job. My experience at USAA from like a culture standpoint and work-life balance standpoint, like it was awesome. Everybody is super nice, very friendly, lots of really smart people. Um, and it was a great experience. Now I know the next question is going to be, why did I leave if it was so great? And really the reason that I decided to leave was I was craving a little bit more modern technology. Um, big organizations like USAA, the bigger you get, the harder it is for you to change quickly. And so you find something that works and you stick with what works, because if you change something and it breaks, the more people you have, the more people are upset at you. Um, so that after a while, I started craving newer technology, and the slowness overall is what encouraged me to look for a different opportunity. And also, I have Brian to thank for encouraging me to apply to Zencastr, which is where we both work now.
No, I
Uh,
will thank you for the referral bonus.
yeah. But yeah, overall, USAA was fantastic. Met lots of great people there. Learned a lot there. And I would definitely recommend anybody that's interested in or maybe has an opportunity at USAA. It is a great place to work. They will take care of you.
So, real quick before we jump into other questions, number 7 here mentions the GitHub stack. If whoever wrote that could elaborate a little bit. I'm not sure that I understand what that's referencing.
I think, Brian, that's referencing the GitHub Actions in the repository, maybe for Vercel and stuff. I'm not
Yes, that
sure.
would make sense. But yeah, if you could elaborate just to make sure that I answer that question correctly when we get to it, that'd be great.
And then, Brian, before we jump back into it, let me answer number 8, which is, Zach, how's the work at USAA different than Zencastr? I kind of touched on this a little bit, but really it's just how modern technology is. At USAA, I was writing JavaScript, not TypeScript, and we were writing React and a fairly old version of React with other old things built in. And it's not that there wasn't a focus at USA on modernizing. There definitely was. It's just that the modernizing takes a lot more effort when you have millions, maybe billions of lines of code that need modernizing. And so really that's the difference in work. Zencastr is a lot faster paced, and I crave that. I really like being busy and learning quickly. And so that's the main difference there.
Cool. I have one. I'm going to take, well, kind of two. Yeah, I'm going to take questions 6 and 9 actually are related. Also, nice. So, any advice for people not coming from CS to develop industry applicable skills, boot camps, open source projects, hackathons? I'll answer, and then Zach, I kind of want to hear your answer as well, because I think we come from different backgrounds. So I did not finish college. I did a year, like a year and a half of a computer science major, but most of the code that I've learned has been self-taught. And I think that like my perspective on coming into CS is to just write a lot of code. Either like you can do hackathons. I love hackathons. Open source projects are great. We'll kind of touch on one of those for question 9. Boot camps, I'm slightly skeptical on. I think they teach you the how and not the why. But really what it comes down to is like you're going to be a better programmer by writing a lot of code. Find the way that you most enjoy doing that, and that's the path that's going to work best for you. So if you want that structure to work on like school projects, or if you need like the accountability that comes with that, then maybe school's the right choice for you. If you're really self-driven, maybe you can get by just writing a ton of apps like I did. Just like failing and writing bad code until you start writing good code. And I think that like that's kind of what I recommend. Is just find the way that you enjoy writing code and do more of that.
So from my perspective, Brian and I are pretty different in this aspect. So I graduated college with a degree in computer science and applied mathematics. And I would strongly agree with what Brian said. The best way to develop skills is write a lot of code. And that's pretty much exactly what I did in college as well. For me, when I started out with computer science and all this, I was a little bit less familiar and I didn't really know where to start with a lot of stuff. I did some stumbling around with HTML and even some PHP, which was I don't recommend it. But it can be hard to understand how to get started sometimes. And so college was a great way to get me introduced to stuff. And I joined lots of organizations in college, did hackathons like Fall In. Um, so things like that are very useful if you can find a community to join, or hackathons to do, open source projects to contribute to. Um, all of that is what's going to make you a good developer. And the root of all of that is just writing a lot of code. The only way to write better code is to write bad code and learn why it's bad and then make it better. Um, so yeah, hackathons are also a great way to do that because you write a lot of bad code very quickly and try and get it to work. And then it's a great learning experience, and you meet a lot of people along the way. So strongly recommend that.
Yeah, for those of you who like enjoy stuff like this weekend, I know at the beginning of October, NASA is running space apps. It's a space-themed hackathon. It's remote, or there's some local, local. I don't want to say like copies, but like people organize events for the hackathon in certain cities. Did that last year with Zach. Actually, it was a ton of fun. I would highly recommend that because they have some really interesting like problems that you're working on and solving, and it's a great way to talk to really smart people. And one to keep an eye out for. I have less advanced warning for these, but Startup Weekend is also great. You usually write less code. It's more of a like entrepreneurial exercise than it is a hackathon, but you still write some code, you still have a good time. And every time I've done it, I have met people that were way smarter than me, and that's another thing I try to do is just surround myself with people that are smarter than I am, and I can learn from them. Okay, last question before we dive back into it. Question number 9: are you two friends? How'd you guys connect? Zach, do you want to take this, or do you trust me to take this?
I trust you, but I can start us off. First, Brian and I are friends most days. Sometimes, we spend a lot of time together, so things get a little rocky, but we're friends. How do we connect? So actually, this is an interesting story. So we both play Rocket League, which is a video game. You drive around little cars and hit like a soccer ball into a net. It's car soccer. And we were in an organization for Rocket League to like play competitively with other people. That organization was doing things with spreadsheets. They were running, all their statistics and everything with spreadsheets. And so Brian had the idea of automating stuff with JavaScript and TypeScript, obviously, and databases and all these fun things. And so he got started on that with a couple other people, and I got recruited somehow. And the rest is history. We've been doing that for a while. And like I mentioned earlier, he eventually convinced me to apply to Zencastr. Now we spend way too much time together every day, but we're friends.
It's true. We work together, and then we get off of work and we work on our open source project together. So some days it's happy fun time, as we like to call it. Okay, so we're gonna dive back into it a little bit here. We're gonna do some more advanced Svelte state management with their store API. If you've used Redux before, forget everything that you know about stores because these work really differently. You're gonna have like small stores instead of big ones. If you've used MobX, this will probably feel familiar to you. I'm gonna go off script here. We're gonna make a new route. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to initialize a script tag, and we'll put a hello world just to make sure that things are working. In Sveltekit, as you're doing routing, so like having multiple pages, you just make a new Svelte file in routes. So here we have stores, and you can have directories if you want to have them nested. And if you want to have parameters, you can do like param name dot svelte. I am going to refer you to the docs on that one though, because there's some nuance there that I don't think I can convey effectively in this period of time, like in a short enough time. But we can come back here and we'll go to stores and we'll be blinded by the white screen. So real quick, let's just thank you. Slightly darker, please. Better. Okay. Cool. So we've got our hello world, and let's have two components here. So let's put a routes directory, and let's just have routes, or no, this should be stores. Stores directory. Store input, and this is going to be an incredibly contrived example. Just bear with me a little bit. So we're going to have store input, and we'll have like store display. And we'll go ahead and import those. And we'll put them on the page. And we're going to see absolutely nothing, because those are empty components. Go ahead and get our main tag and center stuff. And Tailwind will feel a little clunky at first, but as you write more of it, it becomes really fast to just like hand things out. Let's also do min. That's annoying. I don't like how there's no min height classes. Maybe we can touch on some customization. Oh no, this is right. So let's steal our input. As we do, it's gone. Come back. Come on. There we go. We'll just drop this in here, and then that's on the page now. And this will be a paragraph tag. And we'll do rounded 2XL, background zinc 900, padding 8 pixels. Flex call, please. There we go. And we'll give the gap of 8. Have a great night. All right, so now the stage is set. So let's say that I want my input from one component to touch another component, in this case, our display. Like I said, super contrived. So we've got a couple of ways to do that. But we're going to need to start by exposing props in both components. So we're going to do a script tag in both. And we're going to export our state. This is a string, and we need to mark this as TypeScript. Why are you upset? Oh, that's fine. And same thing, we'll just copy this over. Cool. So if you're using TypeScript, you'll also get some helpful type hinting, which is important if you're moving quickly. Just annotate your stuff and it shows up. So we'll do store value is my value. And we'll do store value is my value. Let's go ahead and place this here. And we'll go ahead and bind this. And we have it in both places, and I can change this, but my display is not changing. So a couple of options here. We can bind to an input. We can also bind to props. This is one of the things that differentiates Svelte from Hush. Yes, I need to yeah, this is one of the things that differentiates Svelte from React a little bit. We don't have a firm belief in one-way data flow, which is a great foot gun. You can shoot yourself in the foot pretty hard with it, but if you are careful with it, it can also be a really powerful tool so that you don't have to deal with writing events or passing callbacks or like doing all of the things in places where like you literally just care about when an input is changed. So here we have the input is bound to outer value, and the store value that's passed in is bound to the input. And we'll just do the same thing here. We don't have to bind this one because it's read-only, and we'll just do outer value. And now these are in sync. So that's great. You can bind two-way state. Now, if we want to do stores, I'm trying to think, Zach, what would be a good example for a store? Should we just bind the store value to the input, or should we do a timer store?
Do a timer or a counter with increment and decrement buttons.
That is an excellent idea. Let's start with the increment decrement buttons. And I'm just going to comment out the input. We're going to come back to this. And then for our store display, we're just going to have our value. So we have three types of stores. We have Writable, Readable, and Derived Stores. And you're going to import these not from Svelte, but from Svelte/store. And believe it or not, the Writable stores you can write to. The Readable stores you cannot write to, and Derived stores are derived from other stores. And we'll kind of go through what each of those mean in a second. So let's start with a Writable store. So we just pass in the initial value of it. And in this case, we're going to do 5. When you're working with stores and TypeScript, which we can make this, you can also generically type them and make them a little bit safer. So let's go ahead and just print our store here. And we just end up with an object, because we're referencing the store itself. And so let's take a look at what this store has. I like to do object.keys some object because it can be a helpful debugging tool. And we have 3 functions. We have set, update, and subscribe. So let's make our button. And we're not going to worry about making this pretty just yet. Actually, we have this right here. We are. There we go. Push me. So we can do onClick outer value dot set 5. Or let's do 6. And then we also need to get the value out of the store. So let's do let v, it's going to be a number, and we'll need to subscribe to the store. So when it changes, we'll get new value, and we'll do v equals new value. And we probably want to look at v. Stop complaining. Thank you. Cool. So we got 5, and we push the button, and we have 6. Now, this is great, but I had to subscribe to it to get the value out. If I want to set it without caring about the value, or I can't set it without caring about the value, and this is kind of verbose, which is a far cry from the concise state management when compared with other frameworks that we talked about earlier. So let's get rid of subscribe for a second, or we'll keep subscribe. If we want to talk about not having to subscribe to change the value, we can do .update. and update takes a value, or it takes a function that receives the value. So value from update, and we can do value from update plus equals 1, or plus 1, because we need this to return a number. So I come back and I can just click this all day and it will just keep going up. And again, we kind of have some verbose code here. Like, this isn't great. We need to reference our store. We need to pass a function that's updating everything. How can we clean this up? And we can actually do that by getting rid of v and getting rid of subscribe and getting rid of update. And we have some more syntactic sugar with the $sign. And we can do $store to reference the value of a store. And v doesn't exist, so this is going to get upset. Understandable. So now we have 5, and we don't have anything other than our store declared, and we have to subscribe to the store to get the value. So where is all of that happening? Svelte is not a runtime framework. And what that means is when you build your Svelte app, it gets compiled into JavaScript. And that might sound like, well, duh, forehead, it's a TypeScript app. But it actually compiles itself out of your app. When you're using a framework like React or Vue or Angular, your app gets bundled into a minified, like, smaller version of itself. But you still have to ship whichever framework you're using along with your code. So it could be React and React DOM that you have to import in your, like, main file before your React app will render. With Svelte, you don't have to do that. But a nice side effect of that is it can do stuff like the post-processing that we talked about earlier. And it can also do these really cool auto subscriptions. Basically, if you reference the store with a $sign, it automatically subscribes to that store for you when your component is mounted, and it automatically unsubscribes from that store when your component is unmounted. And so it basically abstracts away all of that stuff. And you can still use it outside of your Svelte components where you can't auto-subscribe, but for most use cases, it just kind of makes the subscribe and complexity go away. And it also works for setting. So we can actually do outer value plus plus. And if we push this button, you can see just works. And once you start to get over some of the, I shouldn't say get over, once you start to get used to some of the few deviations that Svelte has, it becomes really natural to write, because if I were going to increment some value while I was writing JavaScript elsewhere, this is how I would do it. And I don't need to worry about when is it going to render and how do side effects work and things like that. But if we want to be explicit with side effects, we do have one option for that. The $sign is already kind of indicating some, like, reactive code here. And this is something that is technically valid JavaScript already. It's just been, like, repurposed in Svelte because it doesn't really do much elsewhere. But we have this $: and what this does is it lets us declare this is reactive code. Look at this. When a dependency changes, please update it. It's very much like a use effect in React, except you don't need to manually specify dependencies. If you really need to, because there are some situations where it doesn't get them all, or you want, like, a specific side effect, or, like, you want to depend on a specific variable kind of, like, tangentially, you can do an if. You like if dep. That's a good way to do it. But for now, let's have outer value, and outer value plus 1 is 6. Actually, no, it doesn't have a value. It's just a number. So we can do outer value plus 1 equals outer value plus 1. And I forgot my $sign. And now these are incrementing together. Okay, looks like we have about 30 minutes left on the calendar. Is there anything that we haven't touched on in terms of writing the code yet that anybody in the audience would like us to touch on? We can look at like the database, or we can continue with stores for a couple minutes. I just want to make sure that we're not leaving out important tidbits that people care about. Cool. Let's do readable stores real quick then, and derived stores. And then we will jump into the rest of the questions because I have that pulled up on a monitor and I see it consistently growing. All right. Readable stores are very much like writable stores. Let's go ahead and clean up a little bit here. I don't need my button. However, you cannot write to a readable store. So how does it have a value? Let's do const time since render equals readable. Something I encourage everybody to do when you're using a new framework is utilize control-click in VS Code. You can just like see a lot of the type definitions. It can look scary at first, but as you get used to reading them, they're very helpful. Figure out how your IDE can do this, and I would start to utilize it a little bit more. It's basically docs that are built in. But here we can see that the readable is generically typed, just like writable, where we had number. We give it an initial value, maybe, and then we give it a function, maybe. So let's go ahead and start that, and we're going to do another number, and we'll give it a default value of 0. Let me change this to seconds. And just to sanity check ourselves, in our nice box that we have sitting here, let's go ahead and put this value on the page to a string. There we go. And we have 0. Great. We have done a really roundabout way of describing a constant. The happy fun time starts when we pass our function. This function receives one parameter called set. And this is the this is how you write to a readable store. So you can just do like 5, and now it's 5. And again, that's great, but it doesn't really do anything for us. The contrived example of when this is useful is a timer. So if we did get rid of this, and we can do set interval. I equals 0, set I++. And I want this to run once a second. And now it's counting up. Again, super contrived, but we'll get there. Now, intervals need to be cleaned up when we leave. Svelte will not do that for us. And if you create too many intervals, you just kind of take up resources on your user's computer for no reason. So what we can do is we can do const interval, so we can get the return value of set interval. And we can return a function from our starts, like from here we can return a function. We'll clear interval. Now, again, this is going to be similar to use effect. When we return a function here, we're saying when the number of subscribers moves from 1 to 0, do this thing. So we can think of this function until we return as when the first person subscribes to our store, do this. And this is when the last person unsubscribes from our store. So let's go ahead and throw all of this together. let's do const some value store is a writable number, starts out at 4. Let's add an input, and we have this. Let's use our pretty input that we have, and we'll bind to the value of some store. And real quick, and let's sanity check. 4. Cool. So that's there. Now, again, sticking with contrived examples because that's kind of how we do stores until you start getting into some bigger use cases. Let's go ahead and add a derived store. So derived stores are weird. They don't take an initial value, and both of their arguments are required. The first thing they take is an array of stores. So here we're going to do some value store and second since render. And then you need to pass a function that's going to get called whenever either of those stores changes. Destructuring, if you've heard that term before, is going to be your best friend here because it's going to pass as the first parameter an array that has the values of each store. So for those of you who haven't heard of that, if I have some array like A, I can just do set, just a direct representation of what it is. Oh, we need set. There we go. So you can see that as each of these changes, we have this array. That's great until you're dealing with dynamic arrays or small stuff like this. Like I don't want to be like A of 0 every time I want a value. So this is kind of like a JavaScript thing. There, yeah, this is JavaScript, not Svelte. We can put the array structure here, and then A is going to be the first value of that, B is the second value. And as a practice, when you're writing derived stores, it's helpful to use a $sign. So you can do SVS for some value store and SSR for second since render. And using this $sign just indicates that it's a value from a store. Again, that's not required. That's just a pattern / best practice. And so let's just go ahead and set. Let's add them together. And so now we can see that as I change each of these, our value that's derived in the center changes. So for real-world use cases on some of this stuff, readable stores are great if you're doing anything with subscriptions or like WebSockets or anything real-time. If I was going to work with WebSockets, I could write a readable store that when the first subscriber subscribes, it connects to the WebSocket server. And then it can update its value as events come in. And then you can remove the, you can disconnect from the WebSocket server when that store is unsubscribed for the last time. For writable stores, they can be handy when you're dealing with like larger data structures. I'm trying to think of a good, solid use case for a writable store off the top of my head. Zach, do you have any ideas?
They can be handy for, like you said, larger data structures, particularly if you have a big form with several input values and maybe some buttons or some drop downs. You can create one store that its value is an object, and that object has a property for each part of your form. And as a user fills it out, you can update each section of the form. And then whenever they submit, you've just got all your values in that form right there.
True.
That's a good example.
Yeah. Yes. So that's writable stores, that's readable stores. The derived stores are great for side effects that need to be application scoped and not component scoped. So let's say that I write a store that keeps track of. So let's say I have a readable store, and you can actually find this in the Hackathon repository. I have a readable store that is my current user. So when Supabase is like, hey, the user signed in or signed out, that store's value changes. But if I wanted to have the user's profile be separate, which I probably do because I don't want to overfetch data, I could have a derived store from that user store that goes and fetches the profile whenever the user changes, or things like that. If you type them correctly, yeah, they are excellent utilities because you can have loading state, all of that built in, and it's cleaned up really nicely so that when you're actually using it in your code, it all gets hidden behind that interface.
Yeah, derived stores are more, they're definitely more of an advanced use case. You don't always need one. But when you do need one, it is very nice. And like Brian said, once you get past the learning curve, it is a really good way to clean up your code.
And the final advanced use case I'll leave you to, or leave you with before we jump in, we're not going to demo this today, but we have that subscribe set update interface that we saw earlier when we did object.keys. Svelte will auto-subscribe to anything that implements that interface. So you can actually write your own stores if you want to. If there's interest, I can post a link somewhere to some stores that I wrote for fetching GraphQL, like interacting with the API, so that when you subscribe to the store, it fetches the data and it wires up a subscription so that all of that is live. Super handy tool, just something to keep in the tool belt. But that's also a foot gun, so be careful with that. You want to keep yourself to 1 or 2 foot guns at a time. So.
And also, before we jump into questions, one more thing. In the Slack general channel, I'm posting a link to the Svelte tutorial. What Brian just said made me think of that because they actually have a section in there on custom stores, which is where you can write your own store that implements those 3 functions. But yeah, if you want to learn more about Svelte, the tutorial is incredible. It's by far the easiest to understand and most expansive tutorial for any front-end framework that I have ever done. If you go through that whole thing, it takes maybe an hour or 2. You will have enough knowledge of Svelte to really hit the ground running. It covers just about everything in the framework.
Yeah, it involves writing code. It's an interactive tutorial.
Yes.
Zach's right.
Yes.
It's awesome. I also dropped the repository link one more time in Slack. There's a bunch of resources I put in there. Highly recommend at least looking through them. There's some awesome lists in there. Tons of stuff. But I think that's it for the live coding. Let's jump into the questions because we are now up to 15 questions. So we're going to start at the top and work our way down. Number 1, Zach, what made you get into JavaScript over other languages?
This is a funny story too. So as I talked about earlier, I started at USA right out of college, and at that point in time, I hadn't really touched front end at all, and I thought I was going to be a backend developer. Turns out that the team I was joining at USA needed a front end developer, and so they decided to train me as a front end developer. At first, I was very upset about this. I did not want to do front end. But honestly, I really just fell in love with it after I got into it. I think it's really rewarding to be able to write some code and make something that you can like visually see. And once you get into JavaScript and then TypeScript, you can really do absolutely anything with TypeScript. It's very easy to write both front ends and back ends, APIs, all that kind of stuff with TypeScript. So I just love TypeScript, honestly. It's absolutely my preferred and favorite language. And whenever I want to do anything, I just open up a TypeScript file. That's how I get started.
So for me, actually, before I answer my question, I'm pretty sure there's I think it's like Type ASM or something like that. I don't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but there's actually now a like TypeScript compatible language that compiles to WebAssembly. So like technically, I guess you can write you can write like embedded code in your browser, but like I'm sure that it's only a matter of time before somebody runs it on something. Um, so yeah, literally anything. As for me, I came in wanting to do front end. I avoided frameworks for a really, really long time. Haven't decided if that was a good idea or not still. I was absolutely repulsed by the idea of writing a server in JavaScript for a very long time. And at one point, they were just like somebody at one point was just like, it's in JavaScript, deal with it. And it was kind of at that point where it clicked, like, this is actually good. Like, I can use JavaScript for everything. And I would say that it's not great at everything, but it does. It's good enough that, like Zach was saying, like pretty much any project you can think of, you could pick up JavaScript and do it. I was thinking npm is, or just like the JavaScript ecosystem, like the package JSON file, some of the best package management I've worked with. Pip, awful. NuGet, also bad. I don't like NuGet for C#/.NET. So yeah, that's me in JavaScript. Zach, what is your long-term career goal?
Um, it's a tough question. I mean, honestly, like I have pretty short-term vision. I have a very general long-term goal. Um, really, I just want to, continue learning and continue becoming a better developer. Get more active into open source and kind of, get more experience in leading people. I really enjoy writing code, so I don't see myself being any type of manager. Uh, you know, things could change, but that's not my goal as of right now. Um, but yeah, I like writing code, and so I'm happy where I'm at right now. Um, I write a lot of code, and I want to continue.
Cool. So for me, um, that is a good question. I don't know. I like Zach. I enjoy where I'm at. Zencaster's great. There's always new problems to be solved, even the ones that are a year and a half old. Um, yeah, I write a ton of code. I would like to get into like leading small teams. For the open source project that we work on, we have a couple of people who are new to programming, and I love like nudging them in the right direction, kind of showing them that they can do things, like they're capable. They just don't think they are. Um, and watching people get over that hump is really rewarding. So I'd love to do that more. Um, it's just a step by step thing. In a perfect world, though, I will win the lottery, buy a house in Aspen, um, and just like live in a mountain. It would be great. Um, Number 5, what stacks like Mern or other alternatives you think new developers should look at and work on building skill in? What is Mern? Mongo, Express, React,
Node,
Nginx, Node?
Node, yeah.
Um,
Uh, I would say that if you want to be a front end developer, React is pretty much the gold standard right now. Um, it's not by any means the best framework, as I'm sure you can gather our opinions after our presentation on Svelte. But React 100% is the most popular, most widely used, most widely understood framework. So if you're wanting to get into front end dev, that. And then like what we were talking about earlier with JavaScript and TypeScript, you can really do just about anything with those languages. So using Node.js as a backend is, I think, very powerful and very like it's easy to adapt to any situation pretty much.
I will say you shouldn't learn a stack. Actually,
That too.
I think it's focus on learning concepts. Like I kind of mentioned with the boot camps earlier. You want to learn like the why instead of the how per se. You know, like I think that like frameworks like React, Svelte for the front end, Nest.js, I think is becoming industry standard for backend. What I would do is look at there's like a real world app. It's literally called Real World, and people do implementations of it all over the place, like in everything. But look at doing something like that, or like build an app for yourself, like a to-do list, and just like change out components. Like write an API in Express using Mongo and React, and then change out React for Vue or Svelte, and then throw away your backend and rewrite it in Nest. Change Mongo for Postgres or Redis if you're feeling brave. And I think that like as you learn how all the parts work together and how you can interchange them and the technologies themselves, it will better equip you than just drilling down on one stack and kind of hedging your bets that you're going to get a job with that exact stack being used in the way that you learned. Just figuring out how everything pieces together, I think, is the important part.
I would definitely agree there. And I think that also, abstracting back away from tech stacks a little bit, that really applies to programming languages in general too. If you learn just JavaScript or just TypeScript, you might be really good at those, but even though they can do a lot of things, it's not the right tool for everything, be it performance or ease of use, or maybe just, there's some older technology, an older backend that's written in Java, and it's too bad if you want to do it in JavaScript because it's in Java and you need to know Java. So really focus on learning concepts, like Brian said. The more languages you learn, the more you can generalize concepts in your head and understand how languages relate to each other. And then at that point, it becomes really easy to pick up just about anything. The more adaptable you are as a developer, the more fun you will have and the more valuable you'll be to a company, because things change, right? JavaScript, TypeScript, React are hot right now, but things change, and soon React is going to be not as popular. And if all you know is React, then you might be out of luck. So definitely keep up that adaptability and be able to flex and learn new things.
I will say, in that vein, for all of that, going from 0 to 1 is hard. Like going from no programming languages to one programming language is hard.
Agreed.
I would say it's the hardest. Going from one programming language to 2 programming languages is also hard. It's not as hard, but it is also hard. Going from 2 to 3 or 3 to 5, like that's where things get really easy. So like if you can pick up, like if you can write the same app in like 3 languages, or like the same backend in 3 languages, then like that's a really good place to be in, because at that point you should have all the concepts down. So it's much easier to
same
pick
thing
up
there
new
with
stuff.
frameworks too.
Yeah,
Pick one language and pick the 3 most popular front-end frameworks or back-end frameworks, and if you can do the same thing in all of them, you start to generalize concepts, and you don't just know the way that React makes a component, but you start to understand what is a component, how does a component have state, and how does that tie into the rest of the app.
yeah.
And so I really think what Brian and I are getting to is just write a lot of code. It's not the most insightful, but that's really what it boils down to. Okay, let's move on to a different question before we just say write a lot of code.
We've got number 7. Your GitHub stack is interesting. It looks like it integrates DevOps into the developer role. Do you think this is the way? Okay, I'm going to generalize here and just take DevOps into the developer role.
Yeah.
Again, I think like flexibility is important. So like I probably know significantly more, or I don't know, that might have changed recently, but like I at one point knew a lot more DevOps than Zach. But he knew a lot of other things that I didn't know. So like it's one of those, if you enjoy it, send it. if you try it and you're like, I hate this, maybe it's not for you. Like, that's okay. If you're not in a like less than 15 person company, the odds of you doing both are probably pretty low. So, I mean, it's a way. I don't think it's the way. How do you get better at data structures and algorithms? This is probably for Zach. This is the class that I failed. That led to my university and I had a mutual decision that I shouldn't attend anymore.
Nice.
And data structures and algorithms was the class for that. So I'm not
So
qualified.
I've got a bit of a hot take here. I would say that in the real world, data structures and algorithms are not all that. There are times that they're important, sure, and you definitely need to know how to make inefficient code more efficient. But a lot of the technical mathy stuff that you learn with data structures and algorithms, specifically with algorithms and like the big O notation of your code or whatever, that stuff, I can't tell you the last time I considered that when I was writing code. However, data structures, and this ties into learning multiple languages as well. Conceptually, data structures can be very important, and specifically like basic data structures. You need to know the difference between an array and a set, and when you should use one over the other, because that can have performance implications if you have a lot of data. But really the way to get better, if you're looking specifically to get better with data structures, I would recommend doing some LeetCode challenges, or some similar website like that. They give you a programming challenge and some problem that you have to solve. You get some inputs, you get example output, and then you have to write an algorithm that will take you from the inputs to the outputs. And this is a great way to flex that muscle, especially because, like I said, in day-to-day stuff, when I'm writing a front-end component, I'm not using a data structure or an algorithm. And so they're definitely good skills to have. And so programming challenges like that are a great way to get better at it. And they're a lot of fun.
I have 2 notes before we move on to the next one. First, I'm going to slap a big "it depends" on everything that we say today, because I'm
You
sure
can't use that cop out.
I can. No, I can't. Because somebody's going to get a job and they're going to be like, I listened to Zach and Brian. They said I didn't need data structures. And like day one, they were like, invert a binary search tree.
No.
And number 2, in the similar vein as LeetCode, during the Christmas time, those of you like Advent calendars, there's Advent of code. It starts out really slow, and then it gets to a point where like you have to do the algorithm, or your computer will just run forever. Like you just can't brute force some of the problems. So that's really fun, and you can set up a leaderboard and compete with your friends, which I think you can do with LeetCode as well. Probably, I'd imagine.
Yeah, Advent of Code is a lot of fun. I just put the link in general. And then another one that I actually found recently, if you're wanting to brush up on your CSS skills, is cssbattle.dev, which I ruined one of Brian's days by showing him that. Anyways.
Number 11, what kept you going in the early days of you learning to code and running into endless bugs? So when I was in high school, 2 years ago, I'm not really a British. I took a Java course, and we got an email from the instructor like the week before class starts, as you do, I guess, when you're in a remote class in high school. And he told me that programming was drugs. And then he explained it, because at first I was like, what? Then he explained. And it's when you spend long enough on a problem and then you finally solve it, you get like that high. You're like, I did it. I am the greatest. And then you do it again because you're chasing them. And so like for me, like when I was starting, like it was literally like I would just stay up all night, like working on stuff, just for the sake of like solving the problem or like fixing the thing. So I mean, like that's kind of where I came from. Like I love it. I wouldn't write as much code as I do if I didn't. Um,
Yeah, I think for me, I also have that really strong drive just for like solving problems. And more specifically, I have a very strong drive for automating things. Um, and we're not talking about like, automating company kind of things or, that kind of stuff, but like my brain, everything I do every day, I think, oh, could I write a program that does that? Or, oh, could I grab a Raspberry Pi and, make a website that'll do that for me? Um, and so that's really what drives me um, to work through hard problems is like what Brian said. Once you get to the end, it is extremely satisfactory. Um, and I will say, no matter how tough the bug is to work through, no matter how stupid you feel for how long you've spent on it, um, don't give up because at the end you will get through it and it will make you a better developer. And you will feel like you have accomplished something. And then the next time you run into a similar bug, it won't take you nearly as long.
you shouldn't give up, but you should remember to sleep. Um,
Debatable.
that's the advice I would give myself yesterday. Um, Moving on because we are coming up on time, but we'll get through the questions list. But I'm going to cut it off at 16. Do you have any affiliation with the military? I am an Army brat. Both my parents were in. I got to experience the moving every 2 or 3 years. But outside of that, not really. I have not been on a post in 10 years, 8 years. It's been a while.
Yeah, and I don't have any direct affiliation with the military other than just a lot of respect. And working at USAA really strengthened that respect for me because obviously USAA is very military oriented and military focused, and so that's deeply embedded in the culture there. Um, and so it's you gain a lot of respect working at USAA because you're serving USAA's members, which are military or spouses of military. It's yeah, no direct affiliation, but definitely a lot of respect.
Oh, USA insurance adjusters suck. I'm just going to throw that out there. But
Whoa.
we can move on now.
Uh-huh.
What what newsletters do you subscribe to? I only subscribe to the ones who have somehow like bought my email off somebody, and now just send me spam. I don't like. I'm on Twitter, I guess.
Yeah, I don't really subscribe to anything directly. Reddit is great. Pick some subreddits for different programming stuff like Svelte or React or r/programmer humor if you like programming memes. But Reddit's great for not even just programming, but for literally anything you want to learn. There's a community for it that will help you through it. Um, I find a lot of cool stuff on Reddit.
Just remember that people lie on the internet.
It's true.
Um, how long will it take me to get to your level if I only had done a boot camp? That is not a question that I think either of us can answer. Other than it depends.
Yeah, I think the spirit behind this question is um, the what we showed today can look kind of daunting, and it could look like um, we've got all this magical knowledge in our brains, um, and it seems unattainable. Um, and I will tell you that that is called imposter syndrome. And me and Brian both think that about ourselves in relation to other people. Um,
Literally every day.
Yeah, everything seems impossible until you do it yourself. And I know it's a meme. Everybody says this, but everything I know is from Google or Stack Overflow. Like literally, not even joking. If you don't know how to do something, Google it. If you get really good at Googling, programming will be second nature because Google has all the answers or Reddit or Stack Overflow or a Slack group for whatever framework you're using. It's all there. The internet doesn't lie.
Debatable.
Hmm.
Zach, we kind of touched on this. Is having a background in math necessary for what you do at your day job?
Yeah, it's kind of links into the data structures and algorithms question. It is absolutely not necessary to have a background in math. Um, I am a big nerd, and I literally just majored in math because I like math. Um, I knew going into college that I wanted to do programming, so I majored in computer science. And adding on the double major in math was just a few extra classes, and so I said, "Yeah, that sounds fun." Um, but yeah, it's absolutely not necessary. There are times where it's beneficial to have some understanding of math. Um, if it's trigonometry or um, random number calculations, or there's a couple examples, but um, really it's not necessary. And anything that you need to know about math for programming you can learn very quickly. So absolutely not necessary. Okay, and so our last question, what attracts you to open source? Brian, you want to kick us off?
I think it's like a compulsion to like I don't know. For me, it's like an obligation. I coming at this from a perspective of like I didn't pay for everything, and like I had to learn by doing like grabbing what I could get off of GitHub or Google or whatever. I've always been somewhat averse to the Microsoft style like pay a bunch of money for the thing when I look over and it's like Linux is free and it's like does all these things. And I think that like as you get more and more usage out of open source software, at least for me, it's like I want to contribute back to that. It was helpful for me when I was learning. It lets me do all the things I do for pretty much free. Um, and I want to enable other people to be able to do that.
Yeah, pretty much same for me. It can, open source is, kind of a buzzword and people talk about it, but um, if you sit down and think about it for a sec, um, Svelte is open source, React is open source, Node is open source. Literally everything that we did today, all of that open source. Um, so it's open source does so much for you, and um, unless you help out open source will be no more. um, Open source only exists because the community makes it exist, and so the more that people buy into that, um, the better the community gets. And on top of that, for selfish reasons, it is a great learning tool, to step into somebody else's code base, get your bearings, implement a feature, and then it's pretty rewarding too. When that gets released, you can see the work you did, and know that other people are using it and are benefiting from it.
Cool. I think that rounds us out pretty nice. So I want to thank everybody who has stuck with us for the full 2 hours. I hope this was helpful in getting you ready for the Fall-In Hackathon, which starts tomorrow at 12 noon Pacific time. You can register to join before, during, probably not after, but you'd have to talk to Jamil, before or during the event at fallin.today. We are both in the Fall-In Slack. Availability is a little bit limited this weekend, but if you guys have questions, like feel free to poke me.
Me
I'm
as
down to
well,
help
for sure.
out. Yeah.
Would love to connect with y'all and answer questions about Svelte or TypeScript or these general like career questions, anything.
Yeah. So let us know if we can help any more. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you all again.